Are
you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our dear learners, I'm happy to interact with you today in this noble cause of continuity on history. Now, today we are having a recap on Eastern Europe, and the big question is here, the Eastern question. We are going to make a recap. And as you are aware, sometime back when we were in class, we did ask ourselves what was the Eastern question. And I think you are aware that in the previous class, we noted that the Eastern question was simply the declining power of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century amidst the very many different conflicting interests of the great powers. And these powers, you know, we had the Russia, we had Britain, we had the France. And then the question was, who was going to take over after the Ottoman Empire had collapsed? Okay? And that was the biggest question. And you are aware that the broad question was, who was going to take over from the Turkish Empire? Where, when, how, and to what extent? So it became a very big question and it remained unanswered. Okay? This attempt to sort out the Eastern question actually was not even solved. It wasn't solved at all for some time, and it went as far as the Versailles peace settlement. That's when we saw Versailles settlement of 1919 is when we see the problem actually sorted out. Okay? Now, today, our center of discussion is to do actually the Greek War of Independence as one of the topics that are within the subtopics of the Eastern question. I want you to remember that while we have done the recap on that understanding the Eastern question, we have the Greek War of Independence. Okay. 1821, okay, 1821 to 1832. Of course, I'm aware that you already have some basics, some notes you have done on this. We are going to do much of fitting in ourselves to understanding the Greek War of Independence. And it's a fundamental question that you are going always to pick. Now, the Greeks were under the Turkish Empire, okay? The Greeks were under the Turkish Empire, and for some time, we are told they had challenges, but eventually they started fighting for their independence. It is very important to fight for your independence. What we have to remember here again to introduce that who were the Greeks? The Greeks. These were Slav. They were a Slavic race. Okay? They were a Slavic race or a state. They were Christians, basically Orthodox, okay? And they were very strong. They were very important characters in the Ottoman Empire. But what we are looking at is that whereas they were under the Turkish Empire, they had a different background. They were Slavic race, they were Christians, basically Orthodox, and they were conspicuously very different from the Turks. So we find that the Greeks who had been subjected to the Turkish rule since the 14th century, you will see that it caused a number of challenges. Okay, it caused a number of challenges, and today, since we don't have we have some bit of time, but we are going to dwell so much on the causes. Okay, on the causes of the Greek War of Independence. I'm very much aware that you are in the know of these causes, but we shall take you through this, and you upload the notes. Already you have the notes, okay? You have the notes. I implore you to read the notes, but still add into your research, okay? You will be forced to add your research. Now, let's look at the causes, specifically one, the desire for independence, okay? Desire for independence, okay, by the Greeks. Yeah, the Greeks were under the Turkish rule, and they were never free. Okay, they were never free. They were expecting to do their things independently, but they were under had been under the Turkish regime, Turkish administration, and this was quite disturbing to them. There's no regime that there's no regime that will be supported, and if at all you are subject to race, okay, you are subject to race. The Greeks never wanted to see that they continue being under the Turkish Muslims. Above all, the Turkish Muslims disorganized them so much, and there's a lot that you'll find in your notes here. They had been conquered, they needed to liberate, they needed to do things separately, and this was one of the most outstanding factors. Two, the second factor that you have to remember as far as the Greeks were concerned is the religious differences. The religious differences between the Greeks and the Turkish Muslims. Differences are not so bad, but when they become a conflicting factor, it brings out other sources of pain. Now the Muslim tax actually very much disorganized the Christian what? The Orthodox Christians. Okay. Orthodox. They were Christians of the Orthodox. They had even their headquarters at Constantinople. Now the religious differences reached to the higher level that the Muslims were always calling these fellows infidels, and of course nobody would love to be called an infidel. And the Greeks wanted to end this by going to war to stop it, and therefore cause their independence, which was realized later. The third aspect, the third cause, you look at your notes as we continue. The third cause, which is outstanding, is the desire by the Greeks to restore past glory. Desire by the Greeks to restore their past glory. Okay, I think we are aware that the Greeks were known in the past for games in the Olympics. Of recent, we are going to, I think we are told the Greeks were very, very outstanding in the games, and here they had collapsed as far as the international pride was concerned, and they wanted to redo, they wanted to bring out back the past glory, and that was very, very important. Actually, not only past glory, but also culture, and also culture. Their culture, the Greeks were known for their culture, especially in the games, in the sports. In fact, most of them were actually philosophers, and we were very proud of that. Now, the most important thing is that the youth, the Greek youth, very much wanted to see to it that they regenerate the past glory. And this is what transpired into the Greek War of Independence. Very outstanding as a factor, as simple as that. The details, of course, I know you are going to find it in your notes. The details, you find them in those notes. The other point is the maladministration. Maladministration of the tax leaders, okay? Maladministration of the tax leaders. The tax governors especially, they were very oppressive, they were very abusive to the Christian Greeks. And the Christian Greeks never liked it. They never liked being harassed because of the maladministration that was the experience. Now, going to war for independence, it meant they really wanted to end the bad administration. Maladministration means bad administration. And this is as simple as that. There's no big deal on this. It is maladministration of the tax. The Greeks wanted to stop the bad administration of the Greeks. Now, the other aspect that is important, you'll find, look at those notes, that I think you already have it. Inspiration from the French Revolution. Okay? Inspiration from the French Revolution. The French Revolution of 1789. Inspiration from the French Revolution of 1789. French Revolution of 1789. The French Revolution of 1789 had three major catchwords. I have always told you, it is that of liberty, equality, and fraternity. In simple terms, I've always abbreviated it for you as LEF. Now, liberty, equality, and fraternity. These were the catchwords of the French Revolution of 1789. Many other revolutions that came after the outbreak of the Revolution of France, actually, we are simply borrowing these doctrines. These are like doctrines. Everybody wanted to enjoy liberty. Nobody wants to be in bondage. People want to be free. People want to be equal to others in opportunities. Fraternity, they wanted to enjoy whatever is being done to others in terms of justice. Okay, justice. They wanted justice. So the French Revolution of 1789 had sold this message, and the Greeks were on the dot to fight for their independence in order to enjoy the liberty, equality, and fraternity. So that spirit, that inspiration, is very, very important in explaining the Greek War of Independence. There we have other factors, the influence of the Greeks who lived in exile, in the diaspora. The Greeks who lived in the diaspora, especially those who are in exile, they lived in countries like France, they lived in countries like Britain, actually even in the USA. Unfortunately, I didn't reflect it here, but even in the USA, we had we had the Greeks, and these actually played a very fundamental role. When people are outside there, they do much in influencing other nationals. Okay, even in our country here, we are told President Museveni used to be to be supported by people who are in the diaspora. So the Greeks who were in exile had run out of from Greece. They did a lot in mobilizing resources, they did a lot in inspiring others, and I think their impact was seen when we see the war breaking out. And that is a factor that you cannot ignore. Okay, cannot ignore. The other aspect that's very crucial for you to remember here is the weaknesses in the weaknesses of the Turkish Empire. Okay, the empire had a lot of weaknesses. The Ottoman Empire, which we also call the Turkish Empire, had weaknesses. It had military weaknesses. It was very weak because many people were revolting. It had administrative weaknesses. It had economic weaknesses, and all these ones, the Greeks took advantage. Okay, they took advantage of the collapsing power of the Ottoman Empire, and they decided to fight for their independence, which was a timely position. They became very steady to fight for their independence. Okay. The Greeks also revolted because of the unfair taxation. I want you to remember that the Greeks never wanted to be unfairly taxed. Taxing is not bad, but when the tax becomes unfair, the taxation system becomes unfair. Unfair taxation. The Greeks actually taxation system. The unfair taxation system. We are told there was even a kind of tax that was introduced, and I think this is let me check. There's a very different name, a special tax called haraj. There was a special tax called haraj. This tax was specifically for people who are going to, who are staying in the Ottoman Empire, but at the same time, they had to pay this. This was very unfair. Okay, this was like, for example, usul for staying in the Ottoman Empire, and the Greeks did not find any reason why they were going to pay that. And further still, the defaulters were heavily punished. Okay, yeah, for one or two reasons, people hated it. The punishments that were being meted on them, and the whole thing amounts to unfair taxation system which was being hated by the Greeks, and they had all the reasons to fight for their independence in order basically to stop unfair taxation system by the Ottoman leaders. Okay. Another worst point that he brought these people to fight is discrimination. Discrimination of the Greeks. Discrimination of the Greeks by the tax. It is very bad to discriminate people. Okay, it's very, very bad to discriminate people, especially in the society. They used to abuse the Greeks. They used to do much of neglecting them, especially in the social functions. They used to do a lot of injustices on the Christian Greeks. Okay, the Orthodox Christians, and we are told that while the Muslims were enjoying, okay, for example, the Greeks were being imprisoned, okay, unfairly, and the Muslims were being given favors, for example, in the judicial system. So this discrimination, which was in the administrative circles, in the social circles, it brought a very big question on whether the Greeks were going to enjoy life on earth. So they decided to fight the Ottoman leaders in order to enjoy their independence, and that's a true factor up to today. Okay, various regimes have been fought because of discrimination. But sosola abantu buli musosola abantu, you cause a problem. If you are leaders, you need to have a fair system. Okay, even in Uganda here we find that people always say about sosola abali mu buyinza sosola. So this discrimination is not actually a welcome issue. Some of you, I know you are going to be leaders tomorrow. You need to remember that once you are in leadership, you make sure a system does not discriminate other parties. Okay, other parties. So this was a very important factor that we put across in explaining this event, the Greek War of Independence. Of course, other factors that are very crucial for you to remember, you are going to find is the influence of the Serbian rebellion. Remember this, we are doing much of the revision, what you might have discussed sometime. Okay, must have discussed some time back. Influence of the Serbian rebellion. Okay, this was in 1804 to 1815. Okay, this rebellion was under Karageorge and Karageorge. Okay, Karageorge led the Serbians against the Turks. Unfortunately, they failed. Okay, but whereas they failed, they had sent messages to other disgruntled people like the Greeks that they can also do the same thing and perhaps also succeed. Now this one gave them an eye-opener. Okay, an eye-opener that they can also try. And fortunately, the Greeks tried, and they went far in that period. From 1821, by 1832, they had already achieved their independence. Unlike the Serbians who had failed in that earlier age. So this was also an encouragement. Okay, this movement had failed, but it gave an encouragement to the Greeks that bigger things can be achieved. Okay, bigger things can be achieved, and indeed they achieved it at that time. Okay. Yeah, further still, we are looking at also another cause. I know you are very much aware, the influence of the great powers, the influence of foreign powers. You know, sometimes you can be doing certain things without influence of others. You may not succeed. But influence of foreign powers. For example, Russia, France, Britain. Each of these had an influence on the Greeks. Russia was very much interested because it shared the religious. These were also Orthodox. They were Slav. Okay, so they shared the culture and the religious sentiments. So Russians were very much, actually Russians considered themselves as protectors, as guardians of all Orthodox, including the Greeks who were Orthodox. So they had to come in because these ones were being terrified by the Ottoman tax. Now France was also drawn into the affair, but it was later, and even Britain, which had an isolation policy, also had to join. These two just joined later, okay? Joined later, but this with Russia was directly interested. Now, all these ones are a summation of involvement of all these powers, is what we are saying gave a big drive, okay? It gave them a very big drive to see to it that the Greeks fight for their independence, and indeed they achieved. Just to draw back your attention that Britain had what you call the isolationist policy. Britain never wanted to involve itself so much in these in issues of other countries. Okay, France was like it was on the crossroad. Okay, France was like it was on the crossroad. Remember, this is the time when they had King Louis Philippe, and he had the challenges. Okay, had the challenges, but later on, we find that Britain, seeing that the Greeks were being harassed, they were being humiliated, they also had to join to fight, and they had to join Russia in supporting the Greeks. And in fact, this one caused a big setback in the Congress system later on, as you are going to see, that this one was a big force. But as for this case, this event, the Greek revolt, the Greek War of Independence, I want you to remember that the involvement of these ones, the push, the support, the moral support, the material support that these great powers provided to Russia, to the Greeks, played a fundamental role in causing the War of Independence for the Greeks. Yes, it is true. Those were fundamental causes, but we have more. I hope you are steady. Should be steady. Should be very much steady and ready to continue putting down more causes. Okay. The other cause is the role of the secret society. The role of the secret society. This one is called it is called the heteria philica. Heteria philic. Heteria philic, and this actually it is called it was called a society of friends. Society of friends. You cannot rule out the role of this secret movement. Okay, it was an underground movement which was known. Okay, which was known in Greece, among the Greeks. Now, most importantly, is that it played the role of spreading sentiments. It spread nationalistic sentiments. Nationalistic sentiments. That's one of the roles. Two, it also mobilized members and resources and the army. Okay, the forces. Actually, we are told that it raised around 200, not 200, 20,000 members in the force. Okay, in a force. 20,000 members of this group, heteria philic, which you can call a society of friends. Two aspects that you have to remember is that what was the role of this secret movement? Okay, that its role, whereas it occurred, it played two important roles plus others. One, it spread nationalistic sentiments among the Greeks, not other persons. Among the Greeks. Two, it raised a membership for the force. Okay, and of course you need fighters. You need fighters, and these are very common. We shall see in other movements, like in the Italian unification, you had what you call the Carbonari. You had the Carbonari. The Carbonari. This was also a movement in the Italian what, but in the Greek state, we had the Heteria Philae. It's a technical name which I cannot mention very well, but it was one that you can not rule out in the cause for this revolt. I know it is very crucial. Let me remind you the role of Heteria Philae, the Society of Friends, which is very crucial. Let's add another factor, because we are accounting for the outbreak of the revolution that brought about the independence of the Greeks in 1832. Why 1832? Because it was concluded in 1832. The important factor also that you are aware, you have discussed the Congress system. We have weaknesses in the Congress system. Okay? Yes, weaknesses in the Congress system also gave an opportunity to the Greeks to revolt. How? Disagreements emerged, and it became impossible to have a joint force. Disagreements occurred. I hope you are aware that this Congress system was formed in 1818 during the Aix-la-Chapelle. When the Aix-la-Chapelle, that Congress that was called, during that Congress, they accepted that everybody would be interested in peace. But later on, there was disagreements which occurred, and in the process, the Greeks took advantage. Okay, the Greeks took advantage because of what was happening, and the liberal uprisings. Actually, the disagreements occurred over liberal uprisings. Okay, like the Greeks. Okay, like the Greeks. So at the end of the day, the Greeks took advantage. And rose up. Took advantage. So this is what we are talking about here. That while we are discussing the Greek War of Independence, you ought to remember that the weaknesses in the Congress system. Which weakness? Disagreements. Disagreements over what? Over the liberal uprisings. Like what? Like the Greeks. The Greek uprising. The Greeks had to take advantage. They took over and they took over the center stage, and they had to revolt because of this. So it is also blamed over the weaknesses of the Congress system. Remember, the general settlement and Congress system, these are very different factors. Okay, they are very different factors that we need to explain. All right. We can add another factor. The process. We have the role of the elites. The role, actually the influence of the Greek intellectuals. You see, intellectuals are not very simple people. They can do anything. Okay, they can do anything to disturb you. They created modes for the revolt, Examples, can give the example that is resistance leader called the Alexander Hypsilanti. Hypsilanti. He was an intellectual, and also Cappadocia. Cappadocias. Okay? These were intellectuals, and what did they do? They did about 3 things. Okay? They created modes for the revolt. They made the Greeks interested in fighting for their independence. And nobody could fight because they could place the justification, the concept of fighting. Okay? They made the justification. They brought all the reasons in an intellectual form, and everybody saw light. Okay? These are also, of course, in other circles we call them the elites. People who knew how to read and write. But of course, these were basically philosophers. Some of them were philosophers, others were lawyers, and they made a justification for the revolt. And you cannot rule out that they had a greater impact. Okay, a greater impact. So those are very important characters that you need to remember. Others are like Byron, and there are many others. But of course, in history, remember, we discuss issues that happened, and we use examples. Okay, if you don't give these examples, sometimes you are discussing politics. Politics is where you have predictions, things that perhaps could have not been very clear on the, but here we are looking at what happened. Okay, and these people really were on the ground. Okay, yes, we are continuing to look into this, or to account for the outbreak of this war of independence by the Greeks. We have the growth of liberalism. Yes, growth of liberalism. Growth of liberalism. Liberalism is basically people's liberties, the growth of the spirit of independence, freedoms. People had to enjoy. This was a big movement which was cutting across Western Europe, and it was also cutting across in the empire. Now liberalism also reached the Ottoman Empire, and under the Ottoman Empire you had the Greeks who were suffering under the dictatorship. Liberalism and dictatorship cannot work together. One of them has to fight and eliminate the other. So liberalism, it was a spirit, it was a movement that was cutting across. This was these are democratic agitations. Okay, democratic agitations that were being pushed across the Ottoman Empire, and the Greeks took advantage to pick the spirit of liberalism and justify the fight for their independence. So that was also a very important factor. Of course, at the end of my discussion, definitely I'm going to ask you to write your essays, and you send them on on my line, and I mark them. Okay? Growth of liberalism. So, growth of liberalism. This one, I just want to add that it attacked the dictatorial regime of the tax. Okay, and this was a working point to the advantage of the Greeks, okay? To the advantage of the Greeks, because when liberalism was being spread, definitely they took advantage. The Greeks took advantage because they were attacking the dictatorial government of the Sultan. And this is what I want you to pick very clearly, because the chronological explanation of our facts, growth of liberalism, so what? It attacked the dictatorial regime of the Turks. So what happened? The Greeks took advantage to do what? To fight for their independence. And that's the chronological flow of our facts that we are trying to explain right here. So liberalism is a very important factor here. Then we also have the prosperity of the Greek merchants. The prosperity of the Greek merchants. You can call it influence of the Greek merchants. Yes. Influence of the Greek merchants. I would prefer to call it influence of the prosperous Greek merchants. Now the merchants were very prosperous and they had money. When you talk about merchants, then you know these are people with money, okay? These are people with cash. And any movement needs an economic part. So these ones had a lot of wealth, okay, which they used to sponsor the revolters, the fighters. That is it, okay? Whenever you start a fight, you must know that you are economically very strong, okay? Because the fighters need to be fed, need to be housed, need to be moved, okay? So a lot of things that were needed were being sponsored. So these ones, they did a lot basically in sponsoring the fighters, okay? Sponsoring the fighters and also mobilizing of course, the spirit for independence. They justified the spirit for independence because they were saying for them they had accumulated wealth, they can stand on their own, and they need to be. And above all, I want you to remember that these merchants were being taxed by the Ottoman Turks unfairly. So they had, besides other pain, the most outstanding factor, of course, we are saying that they used their wealth, which wealth took a lot of impact on the state of the Greeks. So they had to do much to fight for their independence because one, they had the money. Okay, they did not go and borrow money elsewhere because they had accumulated a lot of wealth. So, plus other explanations as far as the influence of the prosperous merchants. Okay, of course, in your notes, we did mention that the prosperity of the Greek merchants. Being prosperous is not the issue, but I'm talking about the influence. Okay. Yeah, you can dress up. You can dress up the point in a different way. I know in your notes I did put it in a different version. Now the other one is also now the mystics. The mystics. Yeah, we can call it. Actually, not even the mystics, we can call it failure of the Vienna congressmen to resolve the Eastern question. Failure. I call it failure of the Vienna Congressmen, Vienna Congressmen, to resolve the Eastern question. When you go back to your notes in the Vienna settlement, you remember these were the resolutions which were reached at by the great powers after defeating Napoleon. Now, when they sat, they made a fatal failure. Okay, they had a fatal failure. Now, what did they do? This is what I want to put across here. They simply reaffirmed, yes, they just reaffirmed the Sultan's authority. The point here, they simply reaffirmed the Sultan's authority. Can you imagine? Okay, over the subjects, over his subjects. So what did it mean? That instead of reducing the powers of the Sultan, they simply reaffirmed the authority of the Sultan over the subjects, including the Greeks. Remember, the Greeks were under the Sultan. So since this Vienna settlement was supposed to solve and bring about peace, instead of bringing peace in the Ottoman Empire, it simply put the Sultan's authority over his subjects like the Greeks. And this was very wrong. Okay? Very wrong. In the interest of peace, you could not expect peace. You couldn't expect peace where you had the Sultan's authority being confirmed over the subjects. Okay? Subjects. Now, where does the point come from? We are saying that this gave a justification. This point here gave a justification to the Greeks. Okay? The Greeks had no kind words for the Sultan because the congressmen had failed to bring about peace. Remember, the Greeks wanted to enjoy peace. Okay? Now, here in a chronological explanation of this point is that the Greeks had a foundation for complaints. Okay? This gave the Greeks a foundation to complain. They were being harassed. Okay? They were being harassed because of this dictatorial authority. And of course, they had all the reasons to see that they had to fight for their independence and undo or defeat what the congressmen at Vienna had done. That was a fatal mistake, and we are aware the Congress system failed after some time. So the point is failure of the Vienna settlement, a Vienna congressmen, okay? Vienna congressmen to resolve the Eastern question. How? The congressmen at Vienna simply reaffirmed the Sultan's authority over the subjects. Subjects like what? Like the Greeks. Okay? The Greeks. And this one became a very good justification for the Greeks to start complaining. And when they started complaining, everybody saw a reason and they had to fight for their independence, which was a genuine complaint. Okay? Yes. We are continuing to move. I want to find another reason that is important. The rise, actually, in fact, not the rise, the purification of the written Greek, the purification of the Greek language. Oh, Also, I think here it's not reflected. It's not reflected in your in this note side. I think when I was typing, I left it out. Please, my dear learners, please find this as a very important factor. You note it down for your consumption. So purification of the Greek language, okay, the Greek language written, okay. Actually, this is the actually written. They put it very clear in the written terms. The first thing we had here, the inspirational songs. It had the inspirational songs, okay. We are composed, created belongingness, belongingness. Hope that's the correct explanation. Then it also created unity of the Greeks. Unity of the Greeks. I think that was a beautiful factor. And above all, mobilization of all the Greeks, So these are the detailed aspects. If, for example, I ask you to account for the for the War of Independence, the Greek War of Independence, and you are telling me there was the factor of the purification of the Greek written language, okay? Greek written language. What was so special with this? What was so special? You had inspirational songs, okay? Inspirational songs. You know how songs are important in building the unity. It had a factor of creating belongingness, okay, among the Greeks. Unity of the Greeks, because when you speak the same language and well-organized language, people really express unity. And above all, mobilization of the Greeks for their national cause. And their national cause here, we are looking at the independence of the Greeks. So these four aspects are very, very important that you don't have to ignore. Now the other aspect, my dear learners, is I know you may have not you may have not seen them in your notes, and I'm adding them because we keep on doing research, and I employ you also to do more research in whatever social event that you are discussing. So this is another factor which is actually lacking in your in these basic notes that I uploaded for you on the online. So add this one as a very important factor. You are going to add more two other factors before we look at another cause. The influence of the American War of Independence. Influence of American War of Independence. You remember the Americans did a lot to fight 1778, 1783. They fought against the British, and that spirit that they used was being copied by the Greeks, and it did a lot. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to rush through. The other one is the rise of Tsar Nicholas. The rise of Tsar Nicholas the First. This Tsar Nicholas the First was a terrible man on the part of the Ottoman Empire. He very much wanted the Ottoman Empire to collapse as soon as possible. He actually went to Greece to support them directly. He was on the ground compared to his predecessor. The predecessor was the Alexander. Remember Alexander? Alexander one was reluctant. Now when this one came in, he put a lot of pressure, and he did great. It became a very important factor. And finally, I would think the rise of the able leadership of the resistance leader. I think every event has 20 minutes left. I still have 20 minutes. Okay. The rise, every event, every rebellion, every independence movement, it needs a leader. Now the rise of the able leadership. Okay. Remember the resistance leader for the Greeks was called Alexander Hypsilanti. I think there's no movement that he will succeed without a leader. Okay, without a leader. And this one had other leaders, other people who helped him, like Cappadocia. Okay, these ones, remember, had worked in Russia for some time, and they had the immense experience. So they did a great job in fighting for the independence of their people. Now, definitely I have done much to explain the Greek War of Independence. My dear learners, I want you to remember that this time around I will ask you questions. Account for the outbreak of the Greek War of Independence. That will be that is a fundamental question. Okay, it's a fundamental question which you can keep trying. So you have no reason. We have put across almost 21 points. Okay, 21 points that you can justify a very nice essay. Very good English. So today, thank you so much for catching up with this. Now, definitely there is the cause of the revolt. Now, the cause of the revolt. Unfortunately, we are not going to do much on the cause of the revolt. I will implore you to look at your notes. Look at your notes, these remaining bits. We have when the war broke out in 1821. We have it began in March 1821. It moved. Alexander Hypsilanti did a lot to organize the separate movement. They moved on to the provinces of Wallachia and Moldavia. So the process is not very smooth on this, and I want you to concentrate and simply make brief summaries, because these are events in the course. And in events here, I'm expecting you to remember the dates. The dates. There's a time you are going to be asked to describe the cause of the Greek revolt, and you cannot explain the cause of the Greek revolt without noting the dates. So basically, it is very amorphous. I just want you to concentrate on that. As you see in the details, we shall not do much on that. I'm going to do much summary on the effects. Let us run back on the reasons for the success of the Greeks. Not so much. We shall maybe that one the next discussion. Let me rush through the effects. Let's look at the effects, the consequences of the Greek War of Independence. In 10 minutes, I hope I'll be able to do this for you. Okay, the first aspect, okay, the Greeks were able to secure their independence. Okay, look at the details. It had started sometime back in 1827 with the signing of the London Treaty. When you look at the London Treaty, it is the one which provided all the detailed recognition of the Greek War of Independence. So the first aspect, effects, is that the Greeks attained their independence. That's one. And the process was through the London. When you are mentioning this one, you cannot rule out mentioning the London Treaty. London Treaty. 2, heavy losses. There were heavy losses of lives. Heavy losses of lives. Okay, and property. Yes. This is the obvious point. Losses of life on both sides. Okay, on both sides. You remember, even there were massacres. About 27,000 Orthodox Greeks were killed. 27,000 Greeks were killed, and that was not so good, including their patriarch, the head of the atriarch, who was hanged in the cathedral, okay, in that cathedral of theirs in Constantinople. So you note that it was a very, very destructive movement that led many people to death. Then it changed the work, the work of the Vienna settlement, altered the work of the settlement of the Vienna settlement. Okay, because one, Greece, the Greeks now were an independent nation. Okay, the political map had to change. The political map which had been drawn by the Vienna, remember there was a redrawing of the map of Europe. Now that you had Greece also becoming independent, definitely it had to change the map. The things that had been put in place by the Vienna settlement had to change, especially the political map. Okay, the political map. Then the other ones, it led to the collapse of the Congress system. Okay, it led to the collapse of the Congress system because people were disagreeing. The great powers disagreed. The greater disagreed on how to approach the Greek question. Okay, so the details are right there in your notes. Then the other one, the other one is that European diplomacy was revived. Okay, European diplomacy was revived because now these people had to go back into diplomatic discussions. The London Conference, you are aware, it was one of the issues that we are seeing that was regenerated by the Greek War of Independence. Then the other one, it accelerated the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire actually disintegrated because now the Ottoman Empire had to lose Greece. Now that Greece had already become independent, it was no longer, actually by just the physical outlook, you would see that now the empire had collapsed, or it was collapsing. Yes. It also resulted into the Syrian question of 1831-1841. Our next discussion shall also reflect on the Syrian question, maybe in the next lesson. But we are saying that it led into the serious question. The serious question, Syrian question, not serious question. Syrian question. Syrian question. We shall discuss this Syrian question. It led the Syrian question. The Syrian question, this was basically a conflict between the Sultan of Turkey and Mehmet Ali. Mehmet Ali was one of the governors of the Sultan. In Egypt, that when there were problems in the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan called on his governor from Egypt to come and help him, okay, fight the Greeks. The Christians were fighting. Now the Sultan made promises that we are going to give you Morea, okay, we are going to give you Crete, we are going to give you Damascus. Now this man Mehmet Ali, he said to have sent his son called Ibrahim Pasha. Ibrahim Pasha was a soldier. He went and did a good job, crushed many of those who are revolting, killed many Christians, and he did a great job. Now the Sultan failed to give Mehmet Ali the promised land, okay, the promised provinces. So Mehmet Ali used the force to go and occupy Syria. Now this is where we are having a problem, okay. It caused this one because it emanated out after quelling the Greeks, the Christians, and later on it drew people into. So this one also comes in because of a summation of effects of the effects of the Greek independence. Then the Greek War of Independence forced Britain to drop her isolation policy. Britain abandoned its isolation policy. Britain, time and again, never wanted to involve in other countries' issues, but because it was too much, it had to take the humanitarian hat and it got involved in the Greek question. So this policy in Britain had to be abandoned, and we are saying it was an effect. Then another treaty, it also resulted into the Treaty of Onkiaskeres. Resulted into that Treaty of Onkiaskeres. Onkiaskeres. Onkiaskeres Treaty of 1833. It was a treaty between Russia and Turkey. It was a treaty between Russia and Turkey. It is very important in our history studies for you always to remember that each time you talk about a treaty, then you remember what you are going to mention. Okay? That it resulted into what you call the Onkiaskeres Treaty, and was very, very important. It undermined Louis Philippe's policy regime. Louis Philippe, we are going to discuss Louis Philippe, I think, also in one of these discussions to come. He had to lose his popularity at home because of the Greek revolt. He refused to involve in that. Then it increased the hostility between Russia and Britain. Russia and Britain actually had to increase their hostility over the Balkans, and the war also exposed the hidden interest of the great powers. That was a true factor. The War of Independence inspired other liberal uprisings, many of them in Eastern Europe, and the Young Turks movement also emerged because of this. Many Muslims were also in terrible shape. The consequence was that several Christians in the Ottoman Empire were massacred. Many people were massacred, and that was a great disadvantage. I want to thank you so much for the listening. I'm going to leave you with the two questions that you are going to practice. Okay. Discrimination of the Greeks by the Turks led to the outbreak of the Greek revolt of 1821 to 1832. Discuss. Okay? This is question 1. 2. Actually the question is right there. Assess the impact of the Greek War of Independence on Europe up to 1878. Okay? Yes. Assess the impact. Assess the impact of the Greek revolt. The Greek revolt of 1821. Thank you so much. That was it. We meet again in the different discussion. Okay. So you prepare. We shall be discussing perhaps the Crimean War. Okay, the Crimean War. But after we shall have discussed the Syrian question. Syrian question is not so big. We shall go through that in the next lesson. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Am I on the dot? Sí.